Hello, we continue our broadcasting from Kiev, and we are very happy that our guest today is Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, Emeritus Professor of War Studies, King's College, London. Professor, hello, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
Thank you so much. In your essay, Nuclear Signaling and the End of the Taboo, in July 2023, you wrote, since 1991, nuclear testing has been under a self-imposed moratorium by the major powers. The taboo on nuclear testing is not just about explosions, it's about maintaining the idea that the nuclear threshold must never again be crossed. A few days ago, Russia announced the testing of Burevestnik, nuclear-powered cruise missiles, and Donald Trump announced that he had ordered the United States Department of War to start the nuclear testing immediately and on the equal footing with Russia and China. Does it mean a transition to a new stage of global instability or imbalance, or the beginning of the escalation, or the creation of new rules of the game?
It may mean none of those things. Trump made this statement, which surprised everybody, just before he met Xi Jinping. It was based on a complete misapprehension of what's going on. There has been no nuclear testing by the United States, China, or Russia since 1992. There has been testing by North Korea. The last test they had was 2017. So it's not clear what he's referring to. Russia has been testing nuclear-powered systems, but that's different. That's not testing nuclear warheads, but there's a suspicion that Trump may have got them muddled up. It's actually very difficult for the United States to start testing, certainly not immediately. There is a test site in Nevada, but it's hasn't been prepared for this. They haven't spent any money on looking after it for actual testing. What they do is use computer simulations, subcritical tests. That is, they have blast, but they don't cause chain reactions. My guess is, and this can only be a guess, is that this is a response to sort of Russian nuclear saber rattling. It may get everybody's attention and hopefully could lead to some discussions on arms control, but I don't think it's going to lead to wide-scale nuclear testing, including by the United States. We'll see. Trump does this sort of thing. He sets the hair running and then forgets about it.
Europe and Ukraine for a long time fears that Trump would reach an agreement with Putin against our interest. How you assess the current relationship between United States and Russia? Do you think that it is the beginning of new strategy or some tactical change, or what do you think? How it looks like?
Yeah. I mean, my view from the start of the administration was that there was a fundamental incompatibility between what Trump wanted, which was an immediate ceasefire, because that's how he tends to approach all of these conflicts, to stop the fighting, and the Russian view, which, as you know, requires Ukraine to hand over another 2% of its territory that Russia has failed to take, accept disarmament, accept limits on its independence and sovereignty. And Trump's has never been particularly interested in that. He was under a misapprehension that Putin was interested in a ceasefire too. And as he's realized that this isn't the case, he's taken tougher stances with regard to Russia, although until recently not. This was more in terms of not coming down hard on Ukraine than doing much against Russia. We had the Anchorage summit in August, which I think was probably a turning point, because although this was viewed by many observers as a big gain for Putin, in fact, Putin seems to have completely wasted his opportunity by giving Trump a lecture on the history of the Russian and Ukrainian people, which anybody who's seen this lecture before knows that it goes on at great length and is very tedious, and that's how Trump appears to have found it. So Trump stopped. I mean, this wasn't, I think this was apparent at the time. Trump stopped the summit early. They didn't have lunch as they were supposed to do. It was immediately followed by the meeting in the White House with Zelensky and European leaders. And since then, I think there's been a strengthening of the position. Then you have this other phone call, because I think the other day between Trump and Putin, which was supposed to lead to a summit in Budapest. But again, it was based on wishful thinking about concessions from Putin. And when it became clear that they weren't there, Trump abandoned that. Now we have sanctions. We'll see how well they work, but they have had immediate effects in that Indian and Chinese refiners are not taking, for the moment anyway, Russian crude. Ukraine's attacks on Russian refineries and so on are affecting, means that Russia is not exporting any of its refined products either. So I think there has been a shift, and I think Russia is now starting to get a bit concerned as to where this is now leading.
Let me back to the meeting of Trump and leader of China. And Trump met with Chinese leader 5 times. And this meeting in South Korea was the 6th meeting. And how you assess the consequences of this meeting? And do you think that USA and China both have to come to any agreement today? And do you think that they will be able to play win-win game for two, something like G2, like Trump wrote?
I don't know. I mean, the importance of this meeting was it allowed Trump to row back on a mess he'd gotten himself into. He pushed very hard on tariffs on China, and then discovered that China could push back. And on a couple of issues, the supply of rare earth metals, and on importing soybeans, which has stopped and causing a lot of trouble for American farmers. He appears to have got concessions, but the deal hasn't been signed yet. I think it probably will. It's an interesting question as to whether Trump can work out some sort of relationship with Xi that has wider political implications, including for Ukraine. I don't think we're there yet, and it's not clear exactly how this would be organized. Xi has made a commitment to Russia. It's not an alliance with Russia. There are limits on this. So I don't think it's not unlike North Korea, which has gone much more wholeheartedly in support of Russia. So China has kept its own positions, but it doesn't want Russia to lose, and has been doing quite a bit to help them. So I think I mean, I used to think that if Putin wanted a way out, he would do it through China and then on to the United States. I just think Putin's still got himself so caught by his past demands that he doesn't quite know how to get a way out. If he does, China may play a role in the future. So I'm cautious on this. I think they need to sort out their trade relations first, if they can do that. And if, as Trump says, that there are proper summit meetings between the two, rather than just a short meeting in South Korea, maybe in the future it could become more important.
Professor, Putin has many times said that Russia wants their spheres of interest, like Soviet Union. And he said many times that Russia want to be one of the center of this multiple world, yeah. But sometimes it seems to me that it is a very big mistake of Putin, because nobody wants the strengthening of Russia. Do you think that now it is a big game among China, among USA and China, about the bipolar world and this understanding of world by Putin? It was his big mistake. Nobody wants to have strong Russia now, and I think in future. Maybe it is, I don't know, it's interesting.
I think a lot of countries are very wary about Russia for good reason. China, I think, is pretty unimpressed by Russia. I mean, after all, this has been going on almost 4 years since the full-scale invasion. And I'm sure Xi, as Putin, would have expected Russia to have been victorious by now, but they're not, and there's nobody particularly expects a military end to this war soon. A political end is possible, but not a military end. And Russia could argue until last year that its economy was booming, but it was booming because it was spending so much on the war. And unfortunately for an economy, and that's not an investment, because everything you build goes up in smoke. I mean, you're just investing in destruction. So the Russian economy is now, I think, possibly moving to recession. It's certainly stagnated. And so Russia just appears as a not very successful military power that has put an awful lot into its military effort, 8% of GDP, but with lots of nuclear weapons and a poor economy and a declining economy. So, and on recent events in the Middle East and so on, Russia's played no role, although up to 21, it was made itself more of a player in the Middle East. It's not particularly relevant in the events going on in the Indo-Pacific. It's just totally consumed by its war with Ukraine. So I think for Putin, this is a problem, because part of what he's about is the idea of Russia as a great power. And this is really important to Russia. Since the end of the Soviet Union. So I think, again, he's got a problem, as he's talked up Russia as to what it can do, both with Ukraine and as an international player, but it's not taken that seriously. It's not particularly consulted on the big issues. It's no longer with the G7, which was at one point the G8. So I think I think he does have an issue there. But it just adds to the problem caused by Ukraine's resistance and resilience, that unless he gets something out of this, he's a loser. And that's why I think he's so stubborn when it comes to refusing to make concessions on his sort of maximalist demands, because anything less would make him look like even more of a loser.
Professor, what do you think about the possible scenarios for Russia and for Ukraine for the nearest future? Take into account all things, all situation in United States, in Europe, situation in the Middle East as well, and situation with China, and many, many, many aspects.
What do I think
about scenario for Russia and for Ukraine? Yeah.
I mean, my view almost from the start was that Russia had started this, and Russia would have to end it. I don't think Ukraine is, however painful it is for Ukraine, and I know it's painful, it has very little choice, because its whole independence and sovereignty is at stake, and we know what happens in the occupied territories. So I don't think Ukraine has got a lot of choice. because Russia didn't win quickly, and then for that matter, Ukraine couldn't win quickly either. We're in an attritional war, an exhausting. So it's a question of durability. I mean, we can look at the front lines and we can see it's difficult and things are going on. I still find it hard to see how Russia can gain a massive military breakthrough. I mean, they may take more territory, but in terms of what they want, even just with Donetsk, because there's a lot more territory they need to take, and I can't see that happening quickly. And I think that's a problem for Putin, because he's talked up the Russian campaign, especially recently, and is expecting some big victories. And if he doesn't get those, that'll be pretty problematic. I mean, it's problematic for Ukraine if they do make some breakthroughs soon, but I think they'll still be limited. So you're looking at the economies. I think it really matters that Ukraine gets the seized Russian assets. I mean, I like the scheme that the European Union has come up with, which involves a loan to Ukraine, which will be paid back when Russia pays reparations, which we don't really expect to happen. And I think if that happens, then Ukraine's economy and ability to afford the war is okay for a few more years, which is another problem for Russia. Russia's economy is struggling. Of course, they can keep something going. It's not going to fall off a cliff, but it's an issue. So I think it's a combination of Russia failing to achieve its military objectives, combined with a stalling economy, that provides the best reason for some sort of reappraisal of Russian strategy. I find it hard to be optimistic that this will happen, not because it shouldn't happen or because a lot of Russians want it. I think it's clear that the Russian technocrats, the elite, would really like this war to be over. But Putin is so committed to it. I think he still finds it hard to accept that he can't win. But I do think the next few months are very important in this regard. First, because I think Ukraine needs to hang on as well as it can, and if there are areas where it can push back, well and good. And secondly, because we know that the winter is going to be difficult. The attacks by Russia on your infrastructure are serious. Ukraine survived 3 winters like this. When it survives the 4th, and with Russia, I think also will have a difficult winter. At least some parts of Russia, possibly with shortages of petrol and so on, possibly with utilities not working very well because they've been starved of resources over the last few years. I think if we're more or less where we are in March, it'll be quite hard, I think, for Putin to exude the same sort of confidence about eventual victory that he's been displaying in order to impress Trump and others. That's the point where, if there's going to be another peace initiative, I suspect it will come. I say I'm not particularly optimistic or pessimistic about this, but there does come a point when within the Kremlin, somebody at least should be asking, how does this end? How long do we carry on like this? Because it's actually ruining the society and economy of Russia in the process.
Professor, are you expecting that Putin could make an invasion for Europe in the nearest future? Because there are some experts in different parts of the world who said that he gathered some technique to make a breakthrough in some part of maybe Ukrainian front line, or maybe to, for example, Baltic countries. What do you think about that?
I think if Putin won, if Ukraine was beaten, then over time there would be a degree of tension between Ukraine and Baltic states, Poland, Finland, etc., Norway, Sweden, that there would be a risk of war. I mean, I wouldn't put it very high, but it's not trivial. And I think there's risks of border incidents and so on. There's risks of border incidents already, which could, as we've seen, which could escalate. But I think they can be contained. I really don't think Putin wants a war with NATO at the moment. I just don't think he could cope. He can't beat Ukraine. How would he expect to beat all these other countries while Ukraine is still fighting? I mean, it's not really plausible, and I don't think he wants it, and I don't think he could cope. I mean, there are local advantages and capability that Russia might enjoy, but when it comes to air power and so on, NATO would be far stronger. So I don't think he wants a war with NATO, certainly not now, but the risks would grow if Ukraine was defeated, which is one reason why I think it's very much in NATO's interest to ensure that Ukraine is not defeated. It's not just a question of being friendly to Ukraine or recognizing that Ukraine is the aggrieved state in this situation. It's recognizing that Ukraine is actually fighting now for us all. The Western democracies depend on Ukraine's success. So, and as long as that remains the view, which I think, despite everything going on in Europe, will remain the view for a while, I think Putin, in that sense, is deterred.
Professor, are you expecting that Putin could use this possibility for invasion in Europe just right now as an instrument for pressure for NATO? Because everybody say that NATO is not ready for the big war with Russia, and we hear this from the head of the NATO, from the head of the different states. And of course, I understand that you say that you don't believe that it is possible right now, but as instrument for pressure, just, to invade, to have some land of Baltic country and to change it for some, I don't know what.
I mean, I understand the view, and I'm pretty sure that Putin does want to intimidate NATO countries and make them feel it's not worth supporting Ukraine. I think that's why some of these tests that have been taking place of rather gimmicky missiles and so on, and torpedoes, are part of that. It was the same thing that with the energy crunch in 2022. It's a lot with the drones going into Poland, with the information campaign, cyber attacks, sabotage, not all of it's going on, but it hasn't made much difference. I mean, there isn't any obvious wavering of support, and certainly not for that reason. I mean, right from the start with Biden, it was made clear that NATO was not going to get directly involved in the fighting. And I think, as far as Putin is concerned, that's the main thing he's trying to deter. He really doesn't want NATO to join the war, fighting side by side with Ukraine. But with everything else, I don't think he has, his signaling, as with all these sort of signaling, on the one hand signals he takes it all very seriously and he wants us to think he's tough. But on the other hand, it signals he doesn't want war with NATO. So, and I don't, given what the way that Russia has now been obliged to fight this war, which will be very different from how it would be fighting with NATO, the loss of command capacity, the loss of armored vehicles, demoralization to a degree. I think I'm not convinced that NATO would struggle quite as much as sometimes suggested. I mean, we say these things to ourselves because we need to do more. We don't have enough mass. We haven't produced enough shells in the past. But these things are improving in that regard. So, and again, Putin knows that. And I think, for Russia, Sweden and Finland joining the alliance is quite a blow. They make a big difference. So I think he is trying to intimidate, to tell us that we shouldn't support Ukraine anymore. But at the moment, it's just not working.
Professor, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and
Okay, well, it's always
your
a pleasure
attention.
to talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck.